Welcome, friends, colleagues, to Mission to Marsh. I think this might be the first event dedicated to Saltmarsh in the Blue Zone at the UNFCCC. So thank you so much for all being with us today, and to the UK Pavilion for hosting this event. My name is Maddie and I'm the Senior Climate Project Manager at Blue Marine Foundation. If you'd like to use headphones for the event today, channel 18 on your headphones and 19 for Portuguese translation. Today we're going to be discussing how these forgotten wetlands must become global priorities if we to achieve our international climate and biodiversity targets. The run of show will be a short video from Tasmania showing the largest saltmarsh restoration effort, their largest saltmarsh restoration effort, then a brief dive into the Saltmarsh Breakthrough, followed by a panel highlighting how these ecosystems, when protected and restored, deliver amplified climate, biodiversity and coastal resilience benefits. But first, I'm delighted to welcome our opening speaker, Mary Creagh, the UK Minister for Nature. Minister Gray has responsibility for UK policy on the protection and restoration of nature and wildlife, both domestically and internationally. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maddie. It's wonderful to be here, and I was getting all excited about the film, so sorry about that. Allegedly, there is cake and coffee afterwards, so all your dreams have come true today. Truly, it is wonderful to be here. It's my privilege to welcome you to Mission to Marsh, integrating salt marshes into coastal resilience and climate action. Am I too boomy, or is it okay? It's okay. So I'd like to start by thanking Blue Marine Foundation, WWF, and the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology for partnering with the UK government on this event and for bringing the new Saltmarsh Breakthrough to life. I know the Breakthrough is a global initiative, but I am proud to have such strong UK-based expertise driving it forward, because this is a really important and completely overlooked habitat that is very special to the UK and very close to my own heart. Salt marshes are dynamic coastal wetlands, sheltered from waves and channeling the tides, neither land proper nor sea proper. These are ecosystems that are rich with life, and they are vital to our coastal communities and industries, and they have shaped our identity as an island nation. They are the foundation of some of our key marine food chains. They provide safe breeding grounds for iconic at-risk birds like the bittern and the avocet. For many fish, including sea bass and herring, these wetlands are their nurseries where they breed and feed in a safe environment. But salt marshes also provide a vital global interconnection by offering key landing spaces for migratory birds, stretching their benefits far beyond our national boundaries. Migratory species like nightingales, cuckoos, and ringed plovers visit salt marshes to breed and to nest. Sheep and cattle can use the marshes as grazing grounds, and if you've never tried some salt marsh lamb, you are truly missing out on one of Britain's great delicacies. And longhorn cows, a traditional British breed, can already be found grazing on salt marshes in Somerset. Many small creatures rely on these remarkable habitats. 148 species of insects rely on them for survival. And I know the 120 countries that host the 53,000 kilometres squared of salt marshes globally will have similar stories of their value. Now, I just want to say, I'm going to go off script now, so civil servants will get nervous. But next year, we are going to complete our Round England coastal path. It's the King Charles III coastal path, and at 2,650 miles, so about 3,500 kilometres, it will be the longest continuous footpath in the world. I feel that next year's pavilion should have the footpath and the salt marsh on it. So that is going to reconnect people to our coastal habitats, to our coasts, in a way that speeches from politicians simply can't. So I think this is we're at the standing in the UK at this really interesting reconnection with the sea and coastal habitats. And we know that nature is the monopoly provider of everything we need to exist. Nature is in the firing line of the triple planetary crisis. Oceans and coastlines have a critical role to play in providing solutions to the climate catastrophe. Salt marshes are our friend in the face of a changing climate. They are liminal spaces, neither sea nor land, and they store carbon at higher levels than most terrestrial forests. And yet, last year in England, not a single hectare of salt marsh was restored. And I get to read all of the nature reports that come out. They go out in my name, and it was one of the things that I looked at. Not a single hectare last year in the UK. That might be wrong. I can see Maddie's anxious. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but that was definitely. So we need to do so much more for salt marsh restoration in the UK, because in England they deliver £62 million of coastal flooding mitigation benefits every year, protecting 87,000 homes. Since 1860, we've industrialised, we've drained, we've industrialised, we've got rid of these salt marshes, and we've lost 85% of them. But we are determined to reverse this trend. Our marine protected area network covers 40% of English waters, including most of our salt marshes. And we've reflected our commitment to salt marsh protection in our updated nationally determined contribution announced by the Prime Minister earlier this year. We have funded the development of a salt marsh code to allow for carbon trading and to drive private investment. And as filmmaker Sophie Hunter's Salt of the Earth project rightly reminds us, protecting, restoring and managing our extraordinary salt marshes is a shared responsibility. So I'm thrilled to see this launch today to grow the global community of action that our magical marshes need and deserve. I look forward to seeing more progress here and beyond, and thank you for joining this Ocean Day in our UK pavilion. Do please enjoy the coffee and cake at the end. The Brazilians are doing the coffee. We know our specialism lies in tea. Thank you all very much. Over to you, Maddie.
Thank you so much, Minister. The slides are not working. It's incredibly exciting to hear about the coastal path, and thank you for the UK's guidance and leadership on Saltmarsh restoration and for the Saltmarsh Breakthrough. So we're now going to show a short video, if I can get the slides working. Yeah. From the Natural Resource Management in Tasmania, and the largest wetland restoration project to ever be undertaken there. The project has seen a suite of on-ground efforts that have re-established natural tidal flows and have seen a significant burst of plant, bird and marine life to this internationally significant salt marsh wetland.
The project that we've delivered at Richmond Park is the biggest wetland restoration project that's ever been achieved in Tasmania. What we've done is remove a levee that was stranding a temperate salt marsh community from its normal tidal flows. And as a result, we're witnessing a change in the vegetation and animals that use that wetland. This project was funded by the Australian Government through its Blue Carbon Ecosystem Restoration Program. Blue carbon is a term that's used for carbon that's in coastal and marine systems. And in a temperate saltmarsh community or wetland system, we're talking about the carbon that's taken up through vegetation, pushed down through its roots into the sediments and captured in the sediments and the vegetation, standing vegetation. Together, those carbon is what we call blue carbon. Blue carbon offers one of the most significant opportunities to capture carbon and return it into the Earth systems. So when we take on projects of this scale, we can see the return of ecological services that might have been missing from the system.
I'm Will Eddington, the owner and manager of Richmond Park Estate. We've been working with NRM South on a project to protect the Ramsar wetland for fish breeding stocks, coastal bird life and a carbon sequestration project with the Australian Government. Obviously fish breeding stocks and coastal bird life are two things that I've got a desire to protect. Creating an extra 60 hectares of tidal area is fantastic. In the short time that we've put the project into action, I'm seeing significant changes. The tidal zone is looking like an inland sea now. It looks fantastic at high tide. The samphire is certainly looking really vibrant. There seems to be a lot more crabs, bird life. On a day-to-day basis, I'm noticing significant change.
My name is Vishnu Prahlad. I'm a senior lecturer in Geography, Planning and Spatial Sciences. I'm involved in leading and coordinating the ecological monitoring that we're doing here as part of the restoration at Richmond Park. Forests are usually considered the lungs of the planet, and wetlands are typically considered the kidneys of the planet. So I guess like the organs in the body, wetland systems form a really important part of a healthy, functioning landscape around us. The restoration has involved removing the levee, so that's restored the hydrology of the Richmond Park floodplain. And also part of the restoration, we've fenced out the area, which has removed the sheep from this environment. Previously, the water levels were either too low or too high. So what we've done here is to set the water regime right, so that now we're having this regular flooding, and that's really created the right environment for the wetland here. And along with the tides, you're also getting a lot of fish coming in, shrimp and other crustaceans. And that's creating a habitat here that's then suitable for crabs and snails. And the plants are also coming back, but also that's also bringing the birds as well. The great thing about this project is that we are looking at the ecosystem as a whole and really try to understand how that ecosystem is responding from the restoration that we're doing here. So we've just caught the fish using the seine net. We're going to count the fish, identify their species, and then measure their length and release them back in the water. So we have gobies, and these are all striped gobies, goby A, and we have a 2.5, 2, and a 2, and a 1.5. 2.5, 2, and a 1.5. Alright, so let's pop it on the tray, and we have, a LOI mullet, and it's about 7 centimeters, and we'll release it back now. We've got a multi-beam sonar set up in the channel, and you can see the visual coming through here. And what we're looking for is movement in the form of fish, and often you see it in schools, and that's capturing all the fish that's going into the Richmond Park floodplain and also coming out of the floodplain. So that way we've got another way of monitoring how the floodplain is used by fish, and it also gives us a sense of the biomass that's now being produced by the Richmond Park floodplain. This is now a really, really important fish nursery. So that's, contributing to recreational fisheries, commercial fisheries. It's important bird habitat. It's also a flood soak. So when you get a large flood event, the water is better stored here rather than affecting people's house. But obviously, we would like to track the change over time, in 5 years' time and 10 years' time, and really try to understand the overall benefits of the restoration that's happened here.
My name's Victor. I'm a company director at Blue Conservation Services, and we have partnered with NRM South, with the University of Tasmania, and with RMIT to account for the benefits of this restoration project at Richmond Park. Environmental economic accounting is a combination of normal conventional ecological monitoring and accounting. Putting the environmental data into accounts so that we can describe change that occurs at a particular site. So at this site, we're interested in describing changes in the extent of different habitat types, changes in the condition of the habitat, and also changes in the ecosystem services that are occurring at the site. The action of the removing the levee has improved the extent of the saltmarsh vegetation, that it's improved the condition, that it's allowed for a whole lot of different species to occur. We would expect with the actions that we've taken here that we may be able to increase fisheries productivity in the surrounding rivers. We would expect that we're being able to sequester more carbon. We'd expect to see a much more healthy, happy and thriving ecosystem.
This wetland restoration site, it sits at the bottom of the Coal Valley, which is a really important agricultural zone. So its ability to be able to cycle nutrients at the end of that system it's really important. So what we've been able to achieve here is actually a return of those benefits to the system.
As we've gone through the process, I've learnt quite a bit. I see an opportunity for us with our future developments in business to tell this story. Add to that the benefit to fish breeding stocks, coastal bird life and carbon sequestration, and to me it was a bit of a no-brainer to go through with the project.
A significant part of this project has been bringing many people to the site who might have an interest in understanding why this project is so important and how it can be achieved in other places. And from that, we've now talked with other landholders who are interested in doing similar work on their properties too. So using this as a demonstration project will allow us to scale up wetland restoration in coastal areas across southern Tasmania.
So we have travelled from one side of the globe to the other, and I hope that that's given you a flavour of the global importance of salt marshes. But it's not always the case, and for a long time salt marshes have remained largely absent from the discussion at the UNFCCC, in NDCs, in national adaptation plans and global funding frameworks, despite being recognised by the IPCC as an actionable blue carbon ecosystem. But this year, we're marking a turning point in the narrative. On behalf of WWF, Blue Marine Foundation, the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action, and the Climate Champions team, I'm delighted to officially launch the Saltmarsh Breakthrough as part of the broader Ocean Breakthrough Initiative. As salt marshes are essential ecosystems that provide a vital mix of benefits for nature, climate and people. Found in at least 120 countries, as the Minister has already touched on, thank you. From Arctic coasts to tropical estuaries, they typically occur on the border of land and sea. Salt marshes cover 5.5 million hectares, but have lost 46% of their historic extent, disappearing faster than mangroves. Globally, they store 1.4 gigatons of carbon, support local livelihoods and food security, coastal resilience, and underpinning commercial fisheries, providing critical nursery habitat. Importantly, salt marshes don't stand alone. They are tightly connected to other ecosystems such as seagrass meadows, shellfish reefs, and tidal swamps, and connect upland areas of coastal watersheds, forming part of a dynamic coastal mosaic that underpins biodiversity and resilience. Salt marshes offer an important solution that is ready now, with up to 2 million hectares restorable, and action is accelerating. This forms the foundation of the Saltmarsh Breakthrough. This launch builds on the coordinated development and release of the first State of the World Saltmarsh report that took place in UNOC in June. Alongside global workshops and the development of a shared theory of change, we have brought together over 70 experts from over 30 countries. For those of you in the audience who might not know the Ocean Breakthrough Initiative, they deliver transformative pathways to accelerated action and investments across 5 key ocean sectors: marine conservation, coastal tourism, ocean renewable energy, aquatic food, and shipping. The Saltmarsh Breakthrough will sit alongside the Mangrove Breakthrough and Coral Breakthroughs as part of the Marine Conservation Initiative. The breakthroughs are an opportunity to engage non-state actors and governments alike, all working towards a shared goal and vision. The vision of the Saltmarsh Breakthrough is for salt marshes to be globally recognised and locally stewarded as essential ecosystems. Our 2050 goal is for all salt marshes conserved and sustainably managed, and the restoration of lost and degraded areas achieved and on track to maturity. The breakthrough is underpinned by 3 targets that have been developed over the course of the last year. The first is focused on policy, with a target of 50 countries integrating salt marshes into policy frameworks. This means embedding salt marshes into national climate and biodiversity strategies, including NDCs, coastal zone management plans, and greenhouse gas inventories. Today, salt marshes occur in over 100 countries, but most of this global extent sits within fewer than 60. Achieving this level of policy integration would cover nearly all global salt marsh area and ensure these ecosystems are recognised as natural infrastructure for climate adaptation and resilience. The second target is to conserve and restore 500,000 hectares by 2030. The conservation target acknowledges that halting this loss is our first and most cost-effective step. This is not a target of instant transformation, but of deliberate, sustained recovery. Salt marsh restoration is inherently long-term, requiring careful planning that accounts for the adaptation needs of the marsh itself, as well as the participation and consent of local communities. Detailed design, consultation, appropriate FPIC, and site preparation must precede restoration, meaning that much of this work will be underway by 2030 rather than fully completed. Nonetheless, this represents a realistic and globally significant recovery pathway, roughly a quarter of the world's restorable marshes, aligning near-term planning with 2050 ambition. And the third and final target is focused on finance mobilisation. The greatest environmental return will always come from conservation first, halting human-driven loss and ensuring sustainable management of what remains. This can be achieved through a mix of public budgets, adaptation finance, and blended finance models. Restoring 500,000 hectares of degraded salt marsh calls for a significant additional investment, but this isn't about a simple per hectare calculation of cost. It's about changing the way we think about finance altogether. The breakthrough is therefore less about mobilising one large fund and more about catalysing a new generation of coastal finance models, those that make adaptation and equity central from the outset, and in the long term can drive to the 5 billion target that is estimated that we need to restore our salt marshes globally. We're calling for increasingly blended forms of finance, where public, private, and philanthropic capital converge. If we move finance in this direction, then the figure, whether it's 5 billion or more, becomes not an endpoint, but a foundation for a systemic, long-term transformation in how coastal resilience is financed and delivered. Together, these targets speak to a world where salt marshes are no longer seen as expendable, but essential. And with these targets come key outputs and enablers to bring them to fruition. Today, we're also launching the Policy Integration Taskforce, a new initiative under the Breakthrough to integrate salt marshes into international and national climate biodiversity frameworks. This task force is akin to the Mangrove Breakthrough's NDC task force, focused on ambitious improvements ahead of the 2028 global stocktake. Early deliverables will include technical guidance for integrating salt marshes into national climate plans and alignment with NBSAPs and the Global Biodiversity Framework. We will be looking at regional case studies to demonstrate national policy alignment and foster policy coherence across other international frameworks such as the Ramsar Convention. It's clear that salt marshes are coastal climate solutions hiding in plain sight. By forming strong partnerships and supporting impactful projects, the Saltmarsh Breakthrough will ensure salt marshes play a vital role in sustainable development and climate action. We're now going to move on to our panel segment, and it's my pleasure to introduce Cristina Rodriguez from the Climate Champions team to moderate this session.
Hello. Okay, great, it's working. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Christina Rodriguez, and I'm the Ocean Associate from the High-Level Climate Champions team. And to get started, I would like to invite our lovely panelists to the stage, and also noting we do have a virtual panelist who's joining us. So first, I would like to invite Professor Anjali Ganswami, who's the Chief Advisor for the UK Department of Environment, Food Affairs and Rural Development, DEFRA. I don't think I got that correct, apologies. But Professor, if you would like to join us on the stage. Followed by our next panelist, it's going to be Chip Cunliffe, who's the Senior Director for Innovation and Pipeline Development from ORA. Our next panelist that we're going to be inviting is Dr. Nick Hardman Mountford, who's the Senior Director for Blue Climate and Marine Conservation, and the Marine Conservation Breakthrough Co-Lead from Conservation International. And then joining us virtually, I believe, yes, we have Professor Savandi Jayakodi, who's a chair professor to the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture from Wayama University of Sri Lanka. And just to note very quickly to all the audience members that we do have a QR code that you can see there on the corner. We encourage you to scan that QR code and submit your questions just to make it a very interactive panel discussion for our online participants. So this is a hybrid virtual discussion. And so as we can see, Ocean Day at COP30 has been incredibly exciting. From yesterday and today, we officially launched the Saltmarsh Breakthrough. It's a collective effort to drive a transformative shift in global conservation and restoration for saltmarsh ecosystems, really to support climate action, safeguard biodiversity, and uplift coastal communities. And so the actions that we take over the next decade will determine whether we avoid a climate crisis tipping point and whether the rich biodiversity of our coasts can actually endure its current status for generations to come. And we see salt marshes are at the heart of this challenge. Their future, whether they thrive or disappear, really depends on the decisions that we make now. And so the good thing is, what Maddie just spoke to, is we're not starting from scratch. Around the world, we have restoration efforts that are flourishing, we have policy reforms that are emerging, and we have community leadership that's growing and also being recognized as well. And so in order to meet the scale of the challenges that we're addressing in the Saltmarsh Breakthrough and within the State of the World Saltmarshes report, we really have to scale bold actions. So we need stronger and more effective policies. We need to increase finance for science and restoration efforts. And we really need to amplify coordinated conservation across global, national, and local efforts. So we have to expand research, empower community-led efforts and solutions, and really tailor strategies to local context. And we have the tools to make this a reality, thankfully. The financial pathways are opening, the science is advancing, and we can build it together. And so what we need now is really focused on global collaboration, and that's essentially what led to the need for establishing a Saltmarsh Breakthrough in inspiration of the mangrove breakthrough, the coral breakthrough, and that's ultimately what led to the foundation of the Saltmarsh Breakthrough. And that's exactly what our panel represents today. And so again, we will have a short Q&A after this. So along with the questions I'll be presenting to the panelists, do feel free to submit your questions via that QR code on the screen, just to allow for both in-person and online participation. And so with that, my first question, I would like to turn to Professor Anjali, again, the Chief Scientist Advisor at DEFRA, to speak to the scientific importance of the Saltmarsh Breakthrough and why advancing this knowledge base is so essential. And so, Professor, my first question to you is, much of the global attention and investments in blue carbon has focused on mangroves and seagrasses. What unique challenges, both scientific and practical, do tropical saltmarsh systems face in gaining comparable recognition and support?
Well, thank you very much. It's working.
If not, you can.
Great. Thank you. Is that better? Okay. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's a real pleasure to be here for the launch of the Saltmarsh Breakthrough, because this is an incredibly important moment. I also just want to start by saying that in my background as a biodiversity scientist, I actually got my start in academic research by looking at organisms that live in this kind of interface between the land and the sea, because it creates a really unusual environment where different interactions happen among organisms. And that's why from the perspective of biodiversity and nature, salt marshes are really important and interesting. And yet they, as we have all said, they are really overlooked and understudied. And so I think the biggest challenge really is filling in a lot of the big data gaps that we have for salt marshes. Now, in terms of why they're overlooked, part of it from the perspective of blue carbon is that they probably represent a relatively small amount of the total carbon, the contribution to the greenhouse gas inventories for many countries, certainly the UK. But they do represent, you know, an aspect that we can certainly look to measure, and we are doing that. We are also very likely underestimating them because, of course, they represent a smaller area now than they did in the past, even just in the last few hundred years where we've lost so much of that. So as we recover those salt marshes, we will see that they have a higher impact on our greenhouse gas inventories. So from that blue carbon perspective, they should increase in value. But in order to do that, we need to do a number of things. We need to actually invest in filling the data gaps in terms of what they actually can represent. Now, of course, at the moment, we have sort of global estimates. We are working very hard on getting a more accurate national estimate within the UK, and we hope to have that within the next 2 years or so. And that's part of the data gap there that will help us achieve that and help us really start to bring value or understand the value of these habitats. But of course, the value, as I said, is not just in what they represent for our carbon emissions and our carbon budgets, but it's also in that really unique biodiversity and ecosystem, and also for what they represent in terms of adaptation and resilience of communities. So it's not just about nature, it's not just about carbon, it's also about the people that live in these environments and what protecting and restoring salt marshes will mean. So really what we need to do is gather some foundational data. Now, I shouldn't probably say this as a chief scientist, but while we do need a lot more data, we also have enough data to understand that they are really highly valued and unique ecosystems that we should be working hard to protect.
Thank you so much, Professor. And just echoing, yes, is this good? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. Most definitely recognizing that there's data gaps, but that shouldn't slow down what's needed already to really mobilize efforts to protect and scale global conservation efforts for these ecosystems. And with that, I'd like to turn it to Dr. Nick Mountford, who's the Marine Conservation Breakthrough co-lead for MCI, to reflect on what's needed to really strengthen global conservation and coordination for these ecosystems and bring salt marshes into mainstream climate and biodiversity agendas. And with that, Nick, my first question to you is, why do you think salt marshes on a global scale have been so undervalued, and what needs to change to bring them into the mainstream of nature-based climate solutions? Do you have a, sorry.
Does this work? No. That one work? Yes.
Is this one working? Yes, fantastic. Yeah, well, I love salt marshes. My grandmother used to take me to the backwaters of the Thames in Essex, and you know, we'd sort of go sailing around there, and these islands that were very evocative. They were my treasure islands as a child. So you know, these can be amazing ecosystems just from a personal perspective, but they don't have the iconic value, let's say, of coral reefs or mangroves. They've sort of also got a bit of a connotation, maybe being smelly, unproductive, maybe wastelands, you know, that you're not good for agriculture and so on. So they need a bit of a PR job. You might say that the crawdads effect has helped, certainly in the States. You know, the North Carolina coast has really come to the fore from the book Where the Crawdads Sing and the film that followed on from it, and for the Gen Z audience, Outer Banks as well. The series has really sort of helped show that. It's a great series. But anyway, so maybe you know, the Saltmarsh path can do the same for the UK, Minister. But you know, despite you know, being tightly connected to other blue carbon systems such as mangroves and seagrasses, salt marsh management and conservation does remain critically underfunded and under-prioritized compared to other blue carbon ecosystems like mangroves. And we see this in the NDCs that have been submitted recently. We've seen a big uptick in the amount of mangroves in NDCs. We're seeing more seagrass coming in, but really, you know, salt marshes are lagging a long way behind, and we need to really see that increased focus on salt marshes in these systems. So, why is this the case? You know, salt marshes have been undervalued due to a lot of pressures to develop them, to building coastal areas, agricultural expansion and runoff, and they've all contributed to their decline. They've also got a relatively small global footprint compared to other sort of blue carbon ecosystems. And so really, if we want to mainstream salt marsh conservation, we've got to focus on increasing data availability, increasing finance for salt marsh conservation, and also within that, looking at the cost of inaction, which is huge. I think if we look at where salt marshes are located, you know, they're in about 120 countries, but about 85% of those are at higher latitudes. And so the amount of financing available really depends on public sector stepping up at the moment. You don't get so much philanthropic funding for the higher latitude salt marshes, and even if you did, it's not enough. So if we really want to scale it, we've got to get into private sector investment, and so looking at innovative ways to finance salt marshes. So if I was sort of just talk about a couple of things we've been doing. So one is a program called Blue Carbon Positive Business Models, or BC+. This is a joint program between Conservation International and the Nature Conservancy. And it's looking to accelerate the actual business models, not just individual businesses, but business models that generate climate and strong community benefits from blue carbon ecosystems. And we're partnering with a company called Seawater Solutions in Portugal, and also a partner company in Ghana, and then Phytocore based in South Korea, to promote saltwater agriculture in salt marshes, particularly around a species called Salicornia, which is sort of sometimes known as pickleweed. And it's the thing that when you drive along the coast of Portugal in summer, it turns red, and it's sort of beautiful pink salt marshes. But really hasn't had a strong value, but it's actually got an amazing range of products you can derive from it. Medicinal properties, sort of low sodium alternative for people on salt intolerant diets, human food, and actually a large opportunity for agricultural feedstock as well. So we're working to sort of explore these business models and unlock this, you know, to start to develop a global market in this area. I mean, 1 hectare of Salicornia has the potential to produce 1,000 litres of biofuel annually, 30 tonnes of animal feed, 400 tonnes of CO2 sequestration over a 30-year project lifetime. So really, you know, there's a lot we can do with that. And then I think, you know, also we can look at sort of some of the like impact bond structures that the Mangrove Breakthrough is developing, and see how those can also work for investment in salt marshes. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
I don't think, does this one? Yes? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Nick. Excellent. I think you teed us up actually perfectly for the next question that I have on financing. As we know, the past 2 days have been Oceans Day and Nature Day, and also Nature Finance Day, which is incredibly exciting. But I think something that we've been hearing, or it's been echoed throughout the past 2 days, is the need for financing. And you touched on that. And with that, I'd like to transition to exploring financial mechanisms of this challenge. And so how do we unlock investments and build a pipeline of scalable projects for salt marsh ecosystems? And with that, I'd like to turn it to Chip from Aura. And so, Chip, can you tell us what lessons can be drawn from other successful nature-based investment models to build a robust pipeline for salt marsh financing? Thank you.
Well, hello. All good? Thank you.
Well, look, in the first instance, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to speak. It's a pleasure to do so on day 2 of the Ocean, which is exciting. For those that don't know, the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance is a membership organisation of 130 members, currently including UK government, governments of Canada and some SIDS, the private sector, banks and insurance companies, civil society and scientific institutions and philanthropy as well. And what we look to do is to pioneer finance and insurance solutions to drive investment into coastal nature-based solutions. Salt marshes are a key, as we've already heard, one of those nature-based solutions. I think that there's a real opportunity for us to utilize some of the learnings that we've already seen within the nature-based space already. We have developed we funded 50 projects worth about $20 million over the last 4 years. 29 different finance products have come out of that. 13 will have come to market by the end of this year. And it's utilizing the expertise of our members and indeed internally at Secretary and for the funding from the likes of DEFRA to help us to achieve that. Now, I know Nick briefly mentioned bonds, and indeed one of the things that the UK government has been particularly focused on and provided some financing for is something called an outcome bond linked to OECMs in the Philippines. And the outcome bond is ultimately a sort of a way in which the funds are released from the UK government to those that took the risks at the very beginning of the programme, and it's based upon increased biodiversity and indeed on ensuring the continued management of the OECMs themselves. So that kind of financial mechanism is already being developed. And I can certainly see, ways and opportunities of being able to utilise that kind of programming for salt marshes. The same is true, and we've already heard about carbon credits, of course. I've been working with the Nature Conservancy for the last few years on the development of a resilience credit. And the methodology is about to be signed off by Vera. And the utilisation of that can be potentially used by not just mangroves, but also salt marshes as well. So you can value the resilience benefits for assets that sit behind these ecosystems and evidently the people as well. Now, I know that there was, during Hurricane Sandy, 600, in fact, the salt marshes that sit just below New York provided $625 million worth of property damage reduction. So we already know that kind of figure is having a discernible impact on how you price risk, or should have a discernible impact how you price risk on assets that sit behind those ecosystems. One of the things that we've been working on is called the Coastal Risk Index. Again, a piece of a tool that the UK government has provided some funding for, and that integrates for the first time coastal ecosystems into risk models. So mangroves and coral reefs, understanding the risk reduction value of those ecosystems. And I'm very aware of the importance and opportunity, perhaps, of actually integrating salt marshes into that tool that's currently available and freely available. So let's move towards that. I think it's a really exciting, potentially really exciting addition to the CRI. And perhaps the last thing I'll say is that, the insurance industry itself really should start more to integrate these into their risk models. They're not doing quite as much as they need to. We're starting to work with them much more, and I think that if we can integrate salt marshes into that narrative, then we'll be certainly driving a much stronger and more effective insurance industry as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chip, I think you set the scene perfectly for how we really need to be innovative with how we approach scaling innovative finance for saltmarsh ecosystems. And next, I want to turn to asking our online panelist, Professor Jaya Kodi, just to provide additional context on how saltmarsh, and this is a more technical question, but how Salt marsh ecology differs in tropical and subtropical settings compared to temperate zones. So, Professor, perhaps unmuting yourself, and I don't know if you can hear me actually.
Can hear you very well. I hope you can hear me too.
Yes, we can. Yes.
Lovely. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. It's so wonderful to see salt marshes getting this recognition. So let me go into the question that was given to me. Um, why is salt marshes in tropics are so unique? Well, I think the question itself, the answer is there. They are very, very unique. And at the same time, they also have unique challenges. I would love to outline few of them. I think the very first thing is the fact that salt marshes, what are salt marshes in tropic itself is a question. That's basically because, unlike temperate salt marshes, there is no proper definition or clear description to the vegetation in tropics for the salt marshes, unfortunately yet. And then that is also basically because the vegetation is so diverse. So from the succulent to the grasses, sedges and rushes, herbs and forbs, you have salt marshes which are so seasonal. May I know whether it's an echo? Are you getting an echo when I'm speaking?
No, we hear you fine.
Ah,
There's no
lovely.
echo.
Thank you.
Yes.
So the second challenge is that the vegetation is so diverse. As a result, what has happened is the succulent dominant salt marshes are classified as proper salt marshes. However, when you look at sedge and herb dominant salt marshes, they are either classified as coastal marshes or tidal marshes or tidal swamps. So in tropics, what is really salt marshes got to be really looked at and a proper classification is required. That's another big challenge. And then the confusion becomes murkier because in tropics, some of the salt marshes disappear during the dry season. So they don't carry any signatures of salt marshes, and most of the time they are then classified as just barren, whereas in reality they are salt marshes. So, with all that, I also want to mention that underrepresentation of salt marshes in tropics is a big problem. It's a real challenge. And that is also partly because of funding and also lack of interest and lack of expertise. But the things are changing now, and I'm very happy to mention that. For an example, if I talk of Sri Lanka, with the Ocean Country Partnership or OCPP from the government of United Kingdom, we are seeing a surge in research in relation to salt marshes, and we are also seeing the extent and the habitat characteristics and the new information emerging. I think that's something that we have to continue. And the other challenge I think is very unique to tropics is how to remote sense salt marshes because they just don't have a canopy. So developing the techniques to look into salt marshes requires new technology, new collaborations. And finally, I would also try to talk about another important challenge. This is basically because those seagrasses and mangroves have been included into NDCs, and though they have their dedicated policies and action plans, salt marshes have always been considered as the coastal barren land that can be given away for development. That mindset got to be changed with proper awareness. Now, that lack of awareness itself is the main reason, in the name of carbon, most salt marshes are now being converted into mangroves. So at the end of the day, what I think is that The challenges in tropics for salt marshes are unique, and they are not confined to the country that I represent, Sri Lanka. They are unique to all the tropical countries. Therefore, what is required is getting together to address all these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just being cautious of time, I will just ask our panelists one final question, if you could sum it up in 30 seconds to a minute. Within the context of the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework, so really making sure that there's that linkage, what does success look like for salt marshes by 2030? And perhaps we can just go down the line. So starting with you, Chip. So within the context of the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework, creating that linkage and having that synergies, what does real success look like for salt marsh ecosystems by 2030?
Hello. Well, I think the 5 billion target that was mentioned earlier, I think is sort of a key and critical piece. But I think it's really around how you drive the private sector to work with governments and the philanthropic community to start realizing the value of those ecosystems. I mean, I don't think, from my perspective, if you can do that, then you're well on the way to driving the benefits to nature, to people, to prosperity, etc. So I think it's around collaboration and partnership to make that happen.
Great, thanks. I'll avoid repetition. I think part of it is plugging that data gap. So, for example, one of the things that we're doing here is investing in a salt marsh flux tower network, which will gather real-time data on carbon dioxide and methane, and that will start to give us the information that we need to put a better value on what it represents for our greenhouse gas inventories, et cetera. But we also need to, I think, better quantify the value for adaptation to provide the data that can support those markets and bring finance flowing into salt marshes. But success will look like both having a better understanding of what it represents for our emissions targets, but also for our biodiversity and adaptation targets.
Thank you. So I completely agree with the financing is critical, the data is critical. But if I can just draw some lessons from the mangrove breakthrough about what was learned there is we need to really map that global distribution. We're just hearing from Savandi there about what's actually defined as a salt marsh. So that clarity around what is mapped as salt marsh needs to happen. And just like sort of Global Mangrove Watch did for the Global Mangrove Alliance that led into the Mangrove Breakthrough, we need that for salt marshes. We need to use that to prioritize and know where to focus attention for policy and conservation. And use the tools that have already been developed, because if you're just developing policy for mangroves or just for salt marsh, you're missing a trick. They should be doing them all together. And the third thing is ensuring a unified approach, really to get the community supporting the goals, bringing them together at a national level and internationally, so your strategy is joined up, so you've got the experts and stakeholders across science, policy, finance and industry all working together. This is what the Global Mangrove Alliance achieved. It was defined as sort of group therapy for the first couple of years, where everybody just learning to work together before there was no money on the table, before they could really step forward about setting their goals and then moving on to what became the Mangrove Breakthrough. So we need a global salt marsh alliance, I would say, to kick things off. So thanks.
Thank you so much. And then Professor Online, if you'd like to also share, what does success look like for salt marsh ecosystems by 2030?
Mapping the extent, synergies between all the conventions, and making everyone love salt marshes through good awareness.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for your thoughtful insights and for highlighting both the urgency and the opportunity before us. Today's discussion hopefully underscored that salt marshes are not just a coastal ecosystems, they're vital solutions for climate resilience, biodiversity, and community well-being. Advancing the Salt Marsh Breakthrough will require science, policy, finance, and local leadership working hand in hand, and your contributions today help move us one step closer. So thank you as well to our audience for joining, both here and online, and thank you for Thank you. I'd now like to hand it over back to Maddie to hand us over to our closing remarks speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our panelists, and I think Savandi left us on a great note in terms of raising awareness globally for salt marshes and making everybody love salt marshes. It's now my honor to introduce our closing speaker, Dan Yoshby, the COP30 UN High-Level Climate Champion, to give the closing remarks. Dan, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Hope you're having a good time here in Belém. And as you know by now, this is the COP of implementation and hopefully the decade of implementation. And ocean is our key ally in combating climate change. And it is central to achieve both climate and nature goals. And we are here to acknowledge one of the planet's most important yet overlooked ecosystem, the salt marshes, as the colleagues already pointed out. These quiet coastal wetlands are home to extraordinary biodiversity. They protect communities from storms and rising seas, sustain global economies, and store immense amount of carbon for centuries. Salt marshes support a stable climate, and yet they are disappearing faster than almost any other coastal habitat. The Saltmarshes Breakthrough, launched here at COP30 during Ocean Day, marks a landmark moment on how we understand and value these ecosystems. This effort supports the progress of the COP30 Action Agenda Axis 2, Key Objective 7, to preserve and restore oceans and coastal ecosystems. The COP30 Action Agenda give us the framework to align governments, investors, cities, regions, and communities around concrete solutions. The new Saltmarsh Breakthrough under the Action Agenda brings together diverse stakeholders around science, restoration, and socioeconomic development. Through the collective efforts of global and local partners, we can ensure that salt marshes and everything that depends on them survives for future generations. That sense of shared purpose is embodied in our global mutirão, our COP30 philosophy that invites everyone, everywhere to act together. We have submitted a new 5-year plan for the Global Climate Action Agenda for all of the parties here that builds on the momentum, providing focus, consistency, and a clear rhythm of delivery until 2030. And by that we mean working 24 hours per day, 365 days per year, non-stop, with activation groups fit for purpose for this kind of achievement. So I'm looking forward to learn more about the progress on this new breakthrough over time. Thank you so much for being in Belém. Thank you so much for your work on our agenda. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. And now Mary has already hinted at it, but we've got tea and cake and coffee. So thank you very much for attending.